Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week we're going to be doing some cool work on a Turbo Duo. So this is a console that combines a TurboGrafx 16 with the TurboGrafx CD. So it lets you play HuCard games over here, and then it also lets you play Turbo CD games or PC Engine CD games using the disk drive. These are super hard to come by these days, and they are almost always broken unless they have been serviced. So just as a public service announcement, if you got one of these and you've never had it serviced, take it to a professional and have it done, because it's going to die if it hasn't already. So what I have here in the HuCard slot is the Turbo Everdrive Pro. This is the latest flash cartridge for the PC Engine family of hardware by Crix. What's nice about this is that in addition to just playing HuCard games, it can also play CD games. So that's a super convenient way to enjoy the CD library from the PC Engine. All that being said, there are a bunch of caveats to using this device with something like a Turbo Duo. For one thing, because of the way that the Turbo Everdrive Pro works, you only get mono sound unless you either do some kind of modification or use something like the EDFX, which is completely incompatible with this console. So if you want stereo sound, the best way to go is to install one of these. So this is the Turbonanza. This is made by Zaxor, and it'll give you RGB, S-Video, composite, all using a single 10-pin mini DIN, which is like what the Sega Saturn used to use. And it also fixes this particular issue with the Turbo Everdrive Pro and gives you stereo output as well. So this is kind of like a no-brainer. It's a great option to install on a Turbo Duo. All that being said, though, there's another caveat to using the Everdrive Pro with this console, which is that there's a main ASIC on here which runs the CD unit, and it will not recognize this cartridge for CD games. It'll only recognize it for HuCard games. So what Zaxor has developed is this little board right here, which is called the Duo Disabler. So by holding down reset when you power on, you can disable that ASIC and run games from the Everdrive Pro. And then, of course, if you have real media and you want to use that, you can just turn it on and also use real media. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. So adding both of these mods to this console really kind of makes it the ultimate setup if you already own one of these Turbo Everdrive Pros. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take this thing apart. It's already been recapped. It's working, so thank goodness for that. And we're going to go ahead and install these two modifications and see how they perform. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, so taking apart the Duo is pretty simple. You've got these 5 security bit screws like this one right here. Just use one of these generic security bit screwdrivers to remove it. And once you've got those 5 screws off, you can have a look at the console here. And from here, there's really not much you've got to do. So there's some desoldering to do over here on the controller port. And then there are 2 ground wires over here that need to be removed. Let's just do that real quick. And these little locks need to be kind of bent back. Now that that's all done, we've got 5 screws to remove, and then I think we should be pretty much good to go. Okay, last thing we gotta do is just disconnect the CD drive, which is all the way over here. So you've got these 3 connectors. You just gotta be careful and delicate with them. Okay. And now the board is free. Oh, whoops, not exactly. Here we go. One more ground that needs to be desoldered. All right, so before I get started, I just want to say a few words about Turbo Duos or PC Engine Duos in general. So this one was lucky. It was recapped, and that was all it needed to go and get up and running. So HuCards work, the CD works perfectly. But that is no longer the norm with these consoles. So, I mean, I've been repairing them for a long time, at least 10 years, I would say. When I used to do this like 10 years ago, all I'd have to do is replace the capacitors, clean things up, and I could almost always get these running. Nowadays, it's not normal. Normally what happens is that you have trace damage in addition to needing to replace the capacitors. So there's a lot more work involved. So I really can't stress this enough. If you've got one of these, you need to have it serviced if you want it to actually work and not just be something that sits on your shelf. And at some point, it'll be too much damage and too much time will have passed to fix these. So I can't stress it enough. Get yours repaired if it's never been repaired. But yeah, like I said, I dodged the bullet on this one. All I had to do was get capacitors replaced and it works. And so now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and turn our attention to the bottom side of the board, and we're gonna start with the Duo Disabler. And I don't wanna do both mods at the same time. I'm gonna do one mod, then test, and then try the second mod, and then test. So yeah, we're gonna go down here and call our attention to the cartridge slot. Okay, so the first step to installing the Duo Disabler is just positioning the board, the main board that is, underneath the cartridge slot. And so you can see I've got that positioned right over here. It might look a little different on a Duo R or RX, but this is how it should be for either a Turbo Duo or the PC Engine Duo. So yeah, so the first thing we're gonna be doing is just soldering at these circled points right here. Okay, so that's all set, and I actually had this move a little bit on me when I installed it, so just make sure you apply even pressure so that it doesn't move anywhere, and you know, just do one at a time and don't continue until you're sure everything is lined up properly. Another thing just to say is that sometimes the bottom of these boards will be covered in flux, so there was a good amount of old flux from the factory in this area, so I cleaned up a decent amount of it before I installed this board. All right, so with that out of the way, we're gonna move a little bit over to this chip right here. So this is the main CD ASIC, and we have a second board right over here, which is going to line up basically right about here. So what we have to do is lift up 2 pins on this ASIC. So it's gonna be pin number 3 and pin 40, which is over here on this side. So very helpfully, this solder mask here has labeling, so you can see exactly which pin is which. But these are very fine pitch pins, so it's easy to make a mistake here or break something. So definitely, you know, make sure you have the right tools for this kind of application. So you need either like a fine pair of tweezers like this, or a pick, so that you can get in between the legs once the heat is applied, and then you can carefully lift up just pin 3 without lifting up anything else. So what I'm gonna do is just apply some heat on the leg and the pad, and then just use this curved tweezer here to lift it up. All right, so both of those pins are lifted safely, and I'm just gonna double check and make sure everything is clean in that area before moving on to installing the next board. Okay, so I have this secondary board all lined up with pad number, or leg number 3 and leg number 40. What I found was that there are 2 little pads right over here that are actually connected up to nothing, but they had solder on them, and so they were rigid, or they were creating ridges, and so as a result, you know, this thing wouldn't really lay flat. So I just took some solder wick and cleaned those up, just so that I could get a nice flat positioning of this board. So yeah, as you can see now, it lines up pretty well with both, you know, leg number 3 and leg number 40. So what I'm going to do now is just hold this in place. I think I could also use something like Kapton tape just to hold it down before soldering. And we're going to go ahead and just get this thing connected up. Okay, so that's it. That's probably the most dangerous part of this, this installation, because, you know, if you tear off a leg, that's obviously bad. If you damage any of the neighboring pins, that's bad. So you have to be very comfortable with lifting pins. And yeah, this pick turned out to be perfect for the job. All right, so let's move on to the next step. All right, so now that both boards are set up, there's only a few things left to do. So the next thing we're gonna do is solder in these 2 wires. One goes to A20 and then the other one is card. So they go from these points over here to these points over here. So let me go ahead and take care of that. Okay, so the last step we have is to send right channel audio from the Turbo Everdrive to the console. So what you got to do here depends on the version of the console that you have. So if you have an original Duo or a PC Engine Duo, you use this D pad right down here. And if not, you use this R pad over here. But basically what we're going to do is just remove a single resistor, R616 here. There we go. Just gonna hold this and set it aside. And now what we're gonna do is just run a wire from here. And it can either connect directly up to the R616 pad up here on the top side, or you can route it to the top side of R613 right here. All right, so that's it. So the Duo Disabler should be installed now. So what I'm gonna do now is partially reassemble the console. We're gonna give it a test, and then as long as all that's working properly, we're gonna move on to the next mod. Okay, so I have the console more or less reassembled, and so let's go ahead and test this thing out. So for starters, what I'm gonna do is just power on the Duo with absolutely no effort to actually use the disabler, just to basically put it into default mode. So we've got it powered on, and you can see the Turbo Everdrive Pro menu here. So now if I go here into the CD section, and if I just pick anything, it doesn't actually matter. It's gonna say, hey, I can't play this. There's a conflict between the CD-ROM core and the actual, guts of the hardware. Okay, fine. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna come back here, and I'm gonna hold down the reset button for about a second after I turn this thing on. So we're gonna turn it on, wait for about a second, and then I'm gonna let go of everything. Okay, now it booted back to the menu like it did before. We're gonna go into TurboGrafx CD, and I'll just pick something, I don't know. Yeah, Shadow of the Beast. And so it boots into the BIOS. And there we go. Looks like it's running. Just wait a little bit. Yep, there's our CD audio. We've got our right channel audio and our left channel audio playing. So yeah, so it works. It's really nice. So that way you can enjoy games this way. Or of course, if you want to, you can play real disc games as well. So let's just do that really quick as a final test. Okay, so coming back here, pop this guy out, and now when we turn it on, we're booted to the main menu. And I just put in the 240p test suite just to put anything on here. And yeah, there we go. It's loaded our 240p test suite, which is just a cartridge, or I'm sorry, a CD that I use for testing Duos. But yeah, looks like we're good to go. So yeah, let's go ahead now and move on to the next mod to install. All right, so for installing the Turbonanza, we're gonna turn our attention over here to this chip. This is the HU6260, and this chip generates the RGB signals and the Luma Chroma signals that we're gonna need to tap into for the Turbonanza. So what we're gonna start with is removing these 4 resistors right here. And I'm just gonna use a little bit of wick here to clean this up. Okay, so now that that's all set, what we're gonna do is we're gonna install this flex PCB that Zaxxer provides now for the Duo. And you can do the installation without this, but I personally think this is a great idea. It makes the install a lot easier because you can basically tap all of your signals from the HU6260 without really any difficulty. So the way to set this up is kind of the way you're seeing me do it right here, where you can use these two pads here as your centering points just to get the flex lined up exactly where it's supposed to be. So it should be basically like this. So I already pre-tinned these pads just to make my life easier. So now let me go ahead and just add a little bit of some flux, and we're gonna go ahead and solder this into position. Okay, so everything is all set now, and I'm just gonna go ahead and double check my work off camera, and as long as it all looks good, we're gonna move on to the next step. All right, so I've got the Turbonanza now mounted in its position on the board, and what I ended up doing was just using a little bit of double-sided tape on top of this chip and this RAM chip right here, just to hold it right here. And I did a little bit of soldering off camera, and this is just because it's a lot easier to get these wires in before you attach it to the board. So yeah, I just did that for convenience sake. But they're very helpfully labeled over here. So you've got red, green, and blue for RGB. You've got sync right over here. You've got 5 volts and ground right here. So those 6 wires get connected, and the pads are very helpfully located here on the Flex PCB. So I'm just going to go color coded and go from here to these various points. These 4 pads right here, I believe, are color burst, and these 3 are for S-Video. So what I'm gonna do then is solder in an additional 4 wires that are gonna go from these pads here to these on the Flex PCB. There's a bit of redundancy too. So Luma minus red and I think Luma minus blue are right over here on, and they're also redundantly positioned right here. So you can kind of go wherever you want with your wire routing, but the end result is the same. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start making those connections, and then we'll be back in a little bit. All right, so all of the various connections are complete now. So we have RGB, sync, 5 volts and ground coming in on these sets of pads right here. And I have it all color coded. So RG and B are red, green, and blue. White is sync. This orange is 5 volts and black is ground. And then for S-Video and composite, we have these 4 wires right here. So I believe this is color burst. And then these 3 right here relate to S-Video for Luma and Chroma, I believe. And I decided to use these pads right over here, and overall it looks pretty nice actually with this wiring arrangement. All right, so we're getting close to the end. What we've got to do now is turn our attention all the way up here to the existing AV out port. So we're going to be replacing that with a Saturn 10-pin mini DIN, and people might be thinking, well, why this, and why not just use the original connector? Well, there's a ton of advantages to using this connector. It lets you get composite video, S-video, and RGB all from one simple connection. And you can't really do that with the original connector. With that, you can only get composite and RGB, best case scenario. So yeah, so we're gonna pull this thing off and replace it with this new connector right here. So let me go ahead and break out the desoldering gun and remove this port. All right, so now that the AV port has been removed, which was pretty easy to do, the next thing we're gonna do is just add in some wires down here on the bottom of the PCB where the multi-out used to be. And so this is going to be for left and right channel audio. So have those in place. And the only other thing left to do is install this flex cable. This is going to take all the video signals over to the Saturn DIN, and you just install it like this with the blue stripe facing towards you. So with that, there's actually nothing left to do on the underside of the board. So we're going to turn things around now. Let's see. All right, like this. And so we need to just install this little adapter PCB right here. And this is where the Saturn mini DIN is going to be located. So what we're going to do is use these two ground pads here as our anchoring point. So we'll go ahead and install the this PCB first, and this will allow us to just lock everything into place. And then from there, the Saturn DIN goes in like so. And I'm going to be using, instead of my soldering iron, I'm actually going to be using my desoldering iron for this because it's a much larger tip and it has a lot more thermal mass, so it can do this kind of soldering a little bit more faster and efficiently than a traditional iron can. All right, so let's get started. All right, so the connector is now firmly attached to the board. And I apologize, I actually thought I was recording all of this, but I accidentally didn't have record for everything. But there really wasn't much missed. It was just basically me using the desoldering gun as an iron to heat this thing up and weld it solidly to the PCB. But yeah, as you can see, it's all lined up the way it's supposed to be. So there's really not much left to do now. At this point, all we've got to really do is just finish up the connections on this final PCB over here. So first thing we're going to do is send this in to the DIN. So just like before, the contacts are facing up, just like this. And we've got to bring in audio. So this is left channel audio, this blue wire right here, and it's going to go to the negative pad of C7. So that's the side that faces the AV connector. Okay, and our right channel is going to go right over here to the negative side, but first let me just finish connecting up these points just so that everything's stable. Okay, so with that, we are actually done. So we've got our right channel audio over here, left channel audio here, our video signals coming in from this flex PCB, and everything is now ready to go. So let me go ahead and assemble the console, and then we will do a quick test. All right, so we're ready to do our initial test, and I figured I would use the Turbo Everdrive so I could just use the disabling function in combination with the Turbonanza. And before I do that, I'll just turn it off to the side so you can see the port. And I don't know if it's coming in camera, but like it looks good. But if it was up to me, if it's possible, it'd be really nice to have like a 3D printed outer part here just to kind of hide the guts a little bit better, because of course the original DIN connector was much larger. But aside from that, honestly, it really doesn't matter, and it looks great otherwise. So let me go ahead and just get this thing started. So I'll hold down the reset button, turn it on, wait about a second. Okay, and so right away you can tell using my Saturn RGB cable that things are really crisp. So I'm gonna go ahead, this time I'll pick Rondo of Blood, which is always my go-to favorite here. So we're gonna go ahead and hit start. And so yeah, you can see everything looks really sharp and crisp with RGB. But you know, there's more to this than just RGB. You have also excellent composite video and really sharp and crisp S-video as well. There's an interesting quirk about PC Engine hardware where S-video actually has the correct color palette and RGB has a slightly off color palette. So if you're trying to kind of have the correct color palette, S-video is kind of your best way to go. But yeah, so that's it for this week's video. Everything was a resounding success. If you have a Turbo Everdrive, honestly, I think this combination of modifications is the way to go if you have any of the Duo consoles, whether it's the R, the RX, the original Turbo Duo, or the PC Engine Duo. So yeah, if you guys like this kind of content, then consider subscribing to the channel. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.